And President Cyril Ramaphosa was lauded by members of parliament for his position that South Africa would not be bullied by the US. During the opening day of debates on the State of the Nation address, MPs rallied in support of the government following an attack by US President Donald Trump. Now, Trump has signed an executive order cutting off aid to South Africa in response to the Expropriation Act and the country's stance on Israel. Let's talk about these dynamics with Professor of Sociology and History at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., Professor Xolela Mangcu. Prof, good morning. Looking good for just after midnight there. Thank you very much for being with us and giving us your time. It's really an important moment for South Africa, or let's say Pretoria and Washington. How both our leaders manage this going forward could really determine whether we fall out. There's an irrevocable falling out with each other, whether there's time to still rescue this relationship. But I'd like to start with what the sentiment is that you're privy to about how Americans are perceiving South Africa, especially on the issue of land and that offer to take in Afrikaners as refugees.
Well, Americans have for a very long time had a favorable, view of South Africa, and for many years actually they were, supportive of the anti-apartheid struggle. So they're not going to be bothered by Trump's pronouncements, except of course, for his base in the right wing of the Republican Party. But in terms of the damage, really, there's very little really that one can do when you have a bully intent on, on striking you, other than, of course, to adopt what I call a principled pragmatism. In other words, yes, fight back, assert your sovereignty as a country, but look in the long term to building that relationship with the United States, because it is, after all, the most powerful country in the world economically, and we are going to need those economic relationships, whether it's in the form of trade or aid. So it's very, very important to be astute and nimble about our relationship with the US, and to keep in mind that American presidents are not there forever, and it's always a dynamic situation whether the Republicans will be in office after the midterms next year. So it's always important for us to have that, adaptability in our relationships with the United States.
I want to go to the executive order that Trump had signed, cutting off aid in South Africa, and you would know that that's been a major talking point here as well. And this was over our alleged aggressive positions towards the US and its allies, read Israel. That order, by the way, is entitled Addressing Egregious Actions of the Republic of South Africa. And it goes to what you're asking now. What chances do our diplomatic missions have to educate and influence the US government? How do you build this relationship inside the US?
One of the things we've done very poorly as a country, actually, is what's called public diplomacy. Our diplomats have been basically absent, missing in action in the United States, I don't know for how long. So we don't really have a presence in the American media or, in American society in general. And in situations like that, it's easy for, opinions, even falsehoods, to take root. So it's very important for South Africa to play that role to establish its presence in the United States. And by the way, this whole issue of our relationship with the United States precedes Trump. It all has to do with our positions over the past several years with respect to the positions we have taken with respect to the United States, positions that, in my view, were not as strategic as they could have been. Once again, the U.S. is the global superpower, and we have to be strategic and pragmatic in our relationship with the United States.
Just to follow up on what you just said, what would be some of those non-strategic decisions that we've made vis-a-vis our relationship with the U.S.?
Well, the whole thing of our relationship with Russia and Vladimir Putin, and how we've basically thrown ourselves into the arms of China and and basically showing the finger to the United States. I think there's a way of doing those things where you can have multilateral relationships without necessarily showing the finger to the United States.
There's a significant fear, Prof, that the US will not stop at just cutting aid to South Africa. There's the AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, might be at risk. This could affect trade. How do you see this playing out? And we've heard the word sanctions being thrown into the mix as well.
Well, of course. I mean, again, AGOA has been there. The threat to AGOA has been there before Trump came into office. And now that Trump and the Republicans control both the White House and Congress, it's clear that AGOA is going to go. But I'm not sure if AGOA itself is going to be such a big deal, have such impact on the South African economy as a whole. I think that basically what needs to happen is we need to look beyond just AGOA to our general relationship, building that relationship with the United States in the long run. That's just my view. I mean, it doesn't really help us. I mean, our economy is so small in relation to the United States that, we can thumb our finger at the United States, but the fact of the matter is we have to be very, very aware of the fact that we really, really do have a small economy and we need those resources going forward. It's unlikely to happen under the Trump regime with all of the racism of Trump and his administration and Elon Musk and all these people. But in the long run, I think we have to build those relationships, even as we have relationships with other countries, that I mentioned, whether it's China or any other country.
But, Prof, we can't leapfrog over the Trump era, whether there's a timestamp on it, given the impending primaries, or whether he serves out the entire term. That time frame and the decisions which have already been foreshadowed by the ones he's already made could be catastrophic in many respects. We may not have the ability to wait it out. So I guess going back to the concept of principled pragmatism, it's still needing to take him head on.
Well, I mean, there are two things I'd like to highlight. First of all, I mean, there's a whole lot of contestation in the courts. I mean, most, if not all, of the executive orders that Trump has issued have been declared by the courts to be illegal. So it's not clear whether the aid that he has threatened, whether in fact that is legal. So a whole lot of stuff is still up in the air. As I said earlier on, if a bully and a racist bully is intent on trampling over you, there's very little you can do. Hence, except, of course, to object, to form alliances with other countries, right? But I'm saying that given the reality of the situation, you need to find a way to survive the moment and look into the long run, because what are you going to do? Trump and the Republicans and Musk, we're not the only ones actually in this situation. They tried it with Mexico and Canada, and those countries stood up, and Trump had to backtrack. So, and of course, right, I mean, Trump and the Republicans do not want to alienate a whole country. They don't want to alienate Black South Africa, by trying to, curry favor with Afrikaners. Even those Afrikaners actually, are not, in fact, I mean, too pleased with being associated with Trump. At least, they're not coming out in celebration of what he has said, because in essence, he's saying that they are not patriotic South Africans. So the point I'm really making is that, it's very, very important to be principled, but also to be strategic and to be pragmatic going forward, because there's no getting around the role of the United States. Now, the United States itself may need, certain things from South Africa, in particular, some of our minerals, that go into these new technologies. So, it's a question, again, coming back to this issue of dealing with relationships, right, on a case-by-case basis, on a strategic and pragmatic basis. while holding on to our principles.
And that's why we wanted to have this conversation. You know, there's so much heat and so much noise, and it's an incredibly incendiary but also reactionary environment that's been created and triggered from the office of US President Donald Trump. And statements like what we heard from the acting head of USAID, the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He, of course, has announced that he's not going to be attending the foreign ministers' gathering of the G20 in South Africa in November because the summit, because the country is using the G20, in his words, to promote solidarity, equality, and sustainability. In other words, DEI and climate change. And my job is to advance America's national interest, not waste taxpayer money or coddle anti-Americanism. Your interpretation of that statement, Dr. Mangcu, especially in the context of what you're already saying, this unbridled, sort of racist perspective that we have seen from the executive in the US.
Well, I mean, foreign policy is always a reflection of domestic, domestic policy, basically, right? It reflects the attitudes of the people who are in power at a given time. I mean, these guys basically, I don't see how they're going to be able to sustain what they are doing. Already there's so much backlash. I mean, there's so much trauma in the American public that, I wrote an article a few weeks ago for the Sunday Times, basically arguing that they're going to overreach and they're going to overextend themselves. And they're going to cause their own, it's like they're digging, in my view, their own graves. I mean, people are very unhappy with the role that Elon Musk is playing in the American government. So I'm saying that, the situation is so dynamic. The situation is so within the United States itself. So the attack on DEI in South Africa is just another ruse for basically making a political statement about how they would want to change things in the US and globally. There's no way that America is going to be able to stand against the world. It is powerful indeed, but you can't stand against the world. It just doesn't make any sense. And hence, I'm arguing that it's just a matter of time. I am sure the Democrats are going to win the midterms, and that has an impact on its own. Oh, of course.
Okay.
Of course. Well, maybe I'll eat my shoes if that doesn't happen.
I have been known to feed people things they said they would eat to them. So I hope you've got a brand new pair standing by. If it doesn't go your way, Prof, thank you very much for your time this morning. Really do appreciate it. Now you can go back to bed and get some rest before the commencement of the day where you are. Appreciate it.